What's up, Mets fans? Welcome back to the channel. I hope you all are having a great start to your day. I know I am, because this is a collab that I've been in the works for numerous days now. Took a lot of editing. As you can see, it's a very long video, but trust me, it'll be worth your while. It's myself alongside, yes, Joe DeMayo, writer for SNY that covers the New York Mets and their prospects, as we break down his latest article, as you guys can see right here over the past couple weeks, updating the Mets and their top 20 prospects. So we're going to deep dive the top 10 prospects in particular, my initial stance on them, his initial stance on them, a further breakdown beyond what the article shows, and so much more. A great discussion. So I really hope you guys enjoy. So make sure you stay all the way until the end to find all the deets and all our thoughts on the Mets and their top 10 prospects currently in the organization. If you guys end up enjoying this kind of Mets content and want to see more great Mets content like this, make sure to smash that like and subscribe button, share this video with your friends, put on the notification bell, all those great things. Thank you all so much for the countless support. Now let's get right into today's video. All right, guys, thank you all so much for chiming in. Here we have Joe DeMayo for SNY, a great writer. First of all, before I get into anything, Joe, how are you doing today?
I'm doing good, man. How are you?
I'm great. This is truly a privilege and an honor, especially when we first interacted on social media. I'm like, I need to get Joe on here to talk about something, and especially with your article that you came out with over the past couple of weeks, I thought this would be the perfect time. But if you guys don't know, Joe DeMayo is in fact a writer for SNY, covering the Mets, regarding prospect coverage, among other things. So, Joe, I want to ask you, what has led you to the position that you are currently in?
Yeah, so I mean, I've been writing about the Mets since I was 15 years old. I just latched on to basically any blog that would take me, and just haven't stopped. So, you know, I've been technically writing about the Mets at this point for going on 18 years.
Wow.
Yeah, so it's been a run, but it's fun. I look at it, it's something I just went from different blogs to different blogs. You know, blogs would fold, or, you know, better blogs would offer me a chance to write, whatever. And then I built up a following kind of like the old school way, in that sense, where it's like I just put out so much content that people just followed me for some reason, I guess. And SNY caught wind of it, and you know, I'm friends with a couple people over there anyway, but you know, they reached out and said, hey, would you like to do some work for us? And you know, here we are. And you know, I do a prospect list for them every year, and I do a lot of prospect coverage. And you know, 2019 I went to Syracuse, I went to Binghamton, you know, for SNY, and interviewed some prospects. And you know, hopefully I could do that again this year, because it was, you know, no minor league season in 2020, and obviously COVID and everything, so that wiped that out. But yeah, hopefully I could get back on the road a little bit and start seeing these guys in person.
Yeah, absolutely. I think your story is great. It definitely is help for myself and others that are trying to, you know, either be in the field in some way, shape, or form. Like I myself am just a diehard sports fan, let alone with the Mets, which led me to this channel. I'm like, you know what? I feel that I can really start to garner an audience here because of how amazing this fan base is. And we all know how amazing Mets fan base is. It's truly like no other, if you ask me. So I think that's a great startup. And I also want to ask you too. So you've been with SNY. How long has it been now that you've been writing for them?
2018. End of 2018 is really when I came on. So really just a couple of years at this point.
Okay, yeah, I know, because I know that I've been following you for the past couple of years now, and you have a lot of great work, and I love the podcast too. And everyone, I'll leave that in the description down below. If you guys don't know, Joe has his own podcast called That's So Mets Pod. Awesome work you do there. So yeah, before we really get into anything else, is there anything that you'd like to add before we start rolling?
No, man, I'm good. Just follow me on Twitter at PSL the Flushing. I'm sure this will all go. You're a professional YouTuber. It'll all go in the description. Follow me on Twitter at PSL the Flushing. Check out my work, SNY.TV. And of course, That's So Mets Pod, which I do with Connor Rogers, who does a lot of NFL stuff. That's where a lot of people know him. He does NFL draft work for Bleacher Report, and he's coming into our world. He's coming into, you know, Mets broadcasting and stuff now. So yeah, the podcast is super fun. Just love the ability to just talk at more than 200 characters or whatever you can fit into a tweet nowadays, and just really expand. So podcasting is really cool. But yeah, just follow me on all my stuff, and yeah, let's get into some prospect stuff.
Perfect. Yeah, no. So when you came out with your article over the past couple weeks as an update, because since your previous, top 20 Mets prospect rankings through SNY article, you had a re-update because numerous prospects were dealt since then. And out of these top 20, the top 10 is really what I want to hone in on, because one, normally us Mets fans love to see the top prospects as it is, but when you get into this pool, it's so much different than, in my mind, than just what it was a year ago, because of guys that have continued to either part ways or some guys that the Mets have actually added this offseason. And there's one guy in particular I'm very much looking to talk about. For your rankings, you have an outfielder that caught me a little bit by surprise, that being an 18-year-old Alex Ramirez, signed as an international free agent back in 2019 with the Mets, as we know, at 6'3", 175 pounds. I know that you did a great breakdown on your article, but please expand more on Ramirez as the justice of cracking him in the top 10 here for your list.
Yeah, I'm really willing to be projection based when I do my prospect rankings too. So like when I look at guys, I assess what I think of them long term, and I don't really worry so much about where they are in the minor leagues, how far they're away from the major leagues. I know everybody has their own formula, but to me, I usually base it mostly on upside. And Alexander Ramirez was a huge international free agent signing. He's got a little over $2 million to sign. And if you told me there's a guy in the system that shows a little bit of all five tools, it's Alexander Ramirez. He's not really elite, at least at this point in time. He's not elite in any one trait, but he can hit for contact. He could hit for power. He can run. He can steal. He can field. He basically has all five tools. So Ramirez is an interesting one from that perspective. But the fact that he doesn't have that carrying trait, it's not like he's a plus power guy or a plus speed guy. He would be higher if he was that. But he's the guy that I look at and I go, if there's a guy that in the whole top 10 that you tell me is going to do a little bit of everything, it's him.
Awesome. Yeah, I know. When I read from your piece, especially breaking down how much of that five tool potential there is with him, that's always enticing. It doesn't really matter what they have done up to this point yet, whether they've even really toyed with much in the minors or if they have yet to start off their minor league career.
And
it's always a good thing.
So that's like a sheer projection on Ramirez. And I know, other places probably rank him a little lower, but I don't really worry about what other people do. I rank him as I see him. And Ramirez is a guy that the Mets were excited to get. I mean, they gave him $2 million for a reason. And, the tools are there. It's just a matter of how will he put it together. And if 2020 had happened, we would at least had some numbers behind him. But, we'll see what 2021 brings. He showed up to Instructs in the fall with a bunch of minor leaguers that the Mets had, I think 60 minor leaguers in St. Lucie for about 4 or 5 weeks. And Ramirez, what I was told, didn't look out of place at Instructs, which is pretty good for someone that basically hasn't played pro baseball yet.
Yeah, no, that's always impressive. And I just love the fact of, Ramirez, while he has all these five tools as well, when you look at the Mets and their prospect pool as it is, there's been, at least in years past, in my mind, there's been a lot of guys that have stood as a little bit more one-dimensional than maybe we would have liked. So having a guy of his nature already only as an 18-year-old showing these abilities both offensively and defensively, I just think it's a great thing, because when you look at rankings as it is, it's all projection-based at the end of the day. Like, yes, there isn't a whole lot to back it off of, but normally when you have a higher rankings, it's still projection with the upside. You're not going to have a guy ranked high within top 10, top 5, for instance, unless you're basing fully on upside. If, say, the guy's really one-dimensional, but he's still a top 5, it's normally because of, one, his bat is either phenomenal and you have the defense that you're going to continue to work with, or vice versa. So I don't think that's a bad thing whatsoever.
Exactly. And, from a 5-tool perspective, it's almost like a dying breed. Like, I feel like when I was a little younger, there was, or maybe I just perceived more people as 5-tool players than there were, but it felt like there was more 5-tool type players than there are now. I mean, at this point, who's a 5-tool player in baseball? Acuna, Mookie Betts, Mike Trout. And Trout's even kind of not doing so much running anymore. But like, it feels like the 5-tool guy is dying a bit. And we'll see what Ramirez ultimately ends up, but he's your best bet that has a little bit of everything. And as we progress through the rest of the top 10 and we talk about these hitters and pitchers, you'll see me talk about, obviously, their top trait, and then they have problems at other traits. So
Yeah, yeah, exactly. But that's a great segue into your number 9 ranking here of the 19-year-old, that being right-handed pitcher and Robert Dominguez. This guy is very intriguing to me from the decent research I've done on him thus far. I love your breakdown here. But signed with the Mets also in 2019 as another international free agent at a monstrous 6'5", 195 pounds. The Mets love their tall starting pitchers or relief pitchers, and this guy has been topping out around 99 miles per hour already. He's only 19 years of age. So what are your initial stances on Robert Dominguez, and what separates him from some of the other relievers / starters that are in your top 20 that didn't crack the top 10?
So Dominguez is a real interesting one. So the Mets signed him for, I think, 25,000, something like that. If you Google it, you'll see it. But I think it was 25,000. So it was a smaller signing. He was a little older than your standard international free agent. They're usually signed at 16, and I think he was 18 when he signed, or maybe 17 turning 18. And when the Mets signed him, he was throwing 93, maybe topping at 94. And then they brought him to their Dominican facility, cleaned up some mechanical things. All of a sudden, it wasn't literally overnight, but it sure felt like overnight. All of a sudden, he could touch 99 miles an hour. And the Mets and a couple other teams in baseball that I've spoken to with scouts say, we missed on Dominguez in 2019. He's the best pitcher from the 2019 international signing class, is what scouts believe. Obviously,
Wow.
they're, again, very similar to Ramirez. It's a long way to go. A whole lot of things can happen. But what really, to me, is his size, which you pointed out. He's 6'5", 195. He's got projectability. He still could fill out a little bit. Can't teach 99 miles an hour. And it's not a super, super high effort delivery. It's not like he's going to throw everything out to do so. And at his age, he has a feel for a breaking ball. Changeup really, really lags behind. But he's a guy that I look at possibly 2+ pitches as we go down the road, and a third pitch that every pitcher we talk about typically needs work on a changeup. Changeup is the last pitch that pitchers develop, generally speaking. You always have exceptions, but from a general perspective, every draft I cover, every international free agency period I cover, the changeup every single time is just, they have to develop their changeup. And Dominguez is no different from there. But he shows a feel to throw a power breaking ball, and he could touch 99. And who knows if that 99 could end up being, 100 plus.
Yeah, that's awfully enticing. Anytime you have a guy throwing heat like that, it's always a great thing. But now will be a key test over the next couple of years, hoping that his development continues to progress, the type of utilization that he will have within this Mets organization at some point. Is he what is his role going to be, either, through the pen as a swingman? What would you say at this point in time, as early as things are, and as raw as this will probably be, would you expect Dominguez to be with the Mets pitching wise within the coming years?
That's the toughest part of prospect stuff, is I could say stuff and there's a high likelihood that I'm going to be wrong on a lot of these stuff if we revisit this video in 3 or 4 years.
Exactly.
But ultimately, from a pitcher standpoint, especially like Dominguez, you develop everybody as a starter. And if it comes time that you need to move them to the bullpen, you do that out of necessity, not so much out of desire. Mariano Rivera was a starter all through his minor league career. Francisco Rodriguez K-Rod was a starter all through his minor league career. Jeurys Familia was a starter all through his minor league career. So
great point.
You develop these guys as starters, and then when the time comes, when you get to the major leagues or AAA, perhaps, you go, all right, we developed them as a starter. And the real big part of developing as a starter may not even be with the visions of him actually being in your rotation one day. It's more, get as many innings under these guys' belts as you can, and that's how they're going to hone that changeup. So in Dominguez's case, he really needs work on the changeup. He's not going to really get that much better if he's a reliever right now and he throws 50 or 60 innings a year. You go and you pump him out as a starter, have him throw 120, 150, 160 innings a year, and then that's when you really grow your pitches. And then you get to AAA and you go, all right, the changeup didn't quite get where we wanted it to, but he's got the 100-mile-an-hour fastball and a plus breaking ball. Shift him to the pen, bring him up. And, obviously when you develop as a starter, that helps the ability if you need to be a multi-inning guy, like you said, a swing guy. That could be a possibility too, for sure.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. That's a great point. But yeah, I think we hit the nail on the head with everything with Dominguez. I'm very intrigued by him. He's a guy that I'm going to be keeping a close eye on in the coming years, assuming that he stays within the Mets organization. But getting on to number 8 now for your rankings. This is one of my favorite players already, and is one of the sneaky moves of the offseason. I think we can all agree for the Mets, that being an outfielder Khalil Lee, that they landed in that 3-team trade with Andrew Benintendi being the star outfielder going from the Red Sox to the Royals. The Mets land Lee, as we know, for one of the pitching prospects that they acquired in the Steven Matz deal. He is then flipped this time, not even to the Royals. He goes to the Red Sox to make this deal happen. The Mets were involved in 2 3-team trades this offseason, and Lee was something that no one expected. It completely came out of nowhere. So my initial stance on Lee was, after looking at his numbers and seeing that this guy cannot just steal bags, upwards of 40-plus bags already this past season in his last minor league season. This guy can also hit for contact. He's looking strong in camp for the Mets this season. He's only 22 years of age. And when you look at the depth the Mets currently have in the outfield, after landing guys in Kevin Pillar, also Albert Amora Jr., VR, if you need to throw him out there, you can. Not that you need to, just that he has that versatility. But you have Lee, who's basically on the cusp of even gained some at-bats this season. So what are your initial thoughts on the former third-round pick from 2018? What was your reaction to the trade, and what are your expectations for Khalil Lee as soon as this upcoming season?
I was very surprised that the Mets were involved. When the Benintendi trade, I was like, oh, cool. Benintendi's traded to Kansas City. Nice. And then it's like, oh, the Mets are involved. I said, what are the Mets looking for here? And I figured, if they're getting involved, are they getting a starting pitcher from Kansas City? I was starting to look up Brad Keller and guys like that. And I'm like, are the Mets getting a starter out of here? And then I think it was Andy Martino was the first that implied it might be a prospect. He was like, Mets might be getting a prospect. I'm like, prospect? What's going on? Then Khalil Lee comes. By the way, a little worried about what that player to be named later is, because when I was working on my prospect list, shortly before the trade, so fortunately the trade happened before I published it, so I would have had to do another one. But the arm that they got from Toronto, I was going to rank him outside my top 20. Like, he was a borderline top 20 guy, but not quite there. And now they got a top 8 guy.
Yeah.
That math doesn't quite add up. You don't just typically just swap a top 20 guy for a number 8 guy. So
no, you do not.
So I think the player to be named later might be a little better than we think. Maybe someone in the teens on my prospect list. That kind of would make sense, like a borderline top 20 and I don't know, call it number 14 for number 8 kind of deal, just to use, prospect list as a guide.
Gotcha.
But Lee, generally speaking, very exciting. Upside, very high upside play. My issue actually is his contact. I know you mentioned that. My issue is that his ability to make contact. He struck out at an over 33% rate in 2019.
Yep.
He's not really a big batting average guy. He's going to strike out, but he's got above average raw power. He's got despite the 40 steals, he's not an elite speed guy. He's an above average speed guy with high level base running IQ. So I think from that perspective, Lee will be able to be a 20 steal kind of guy. And defensively, he plays all 3 outfield spots. He needs some work in center, and he was working hard at that at the Royals alternate site last summer. And obviously with the Mets now in Port St. Lucie, he's working on that as well. But his contact ability will kind of tell his future. I think he's a big leaguer just based on his power potential, his ability to run, and ability to play all 3 outfield spots. And I think that's this year. I think Khalil Lee,
so too.
I think Khalil Lee will appear for the Mets at some point this year, whether that's due to injury or however it actually works out. I think you will see him in a Mets uniform this year. And his ability to make consistent contact will determine if he's an everyday outfielder or just a 4th outfielder going forward. But yeah, I mean, they like you said, the outfield depth isn't there. I mean, when you look at the upper minors, the only prospect of any note is Jake Mangum, who I had inside my top 20 as well, who's probably going to start in AA, I guess. So I think he'll start in Binghamton. Khalil Lee will go to AAA Syracuse and, just be awaiting that call. And he's on the 40-man roster too. So that makes it even easier when it's time to make a call. You don't have to cut anybody. You just bring him up, and if someone goes on the IL or whatever the case may be. But yeah, Lee's a big leaguer to me. How good of one? We'll see how much he's able to kind of. You want him to shorten his swing a little bit, not sacrifice the power, but shorten the swing to make more consistent contact. Because I mean, if you're going to strike out at a rate of 33% or even higher than that, it's really tough, because think about it. If he struck out at a 33% rate in AA, major leagues probably going to strike out at possibly even a higher rate. So he's got to fix that swing a little bit, but he's got the tools, and for the price that they probably paid, more than worth the risk.
Yeah, I agree. And that's a great point about the contact. Yeah, the strikeouts have been up for him. He's a guy that you want to make sure doesn't fall into a little bit more of that one-dimensional category where maybe his glove becomes stellar and he's a speed demon, but at the plate, he's around a 200 or so batting average. You don't want that, but it is nice to see him still stealing the bags. I love that speed about him. This Mets lineup, every year we have been complaining, at least I know I have for the past couple of years, about having speed in this lineup has been crucial. The Mets added tremendously this offseason, and bringing in Lee, who again was for a Royals team that's in a rebuild. Yes, they might have a decent season and surprise people this year, but let's be real. When you get an 8th overall prospect from an organization like the Royals, and on the forefront, until we know the player to be named later, you're giving up a guy that you don't even have in your top 20. Give me that any and every day of the week, especially for a team that is so lacking in outfield depth within the organization outside of their current roster.
Yeah, no, the concept made all the sense in the world. And Zach Scott, the acting GM, said, Khalil Lee is someone that he's had his eye on for a couple of years when he was with the Red Sox. Like, he even said, like, when I was with the Red Sox, I told them if Khalil Lee ever becomes available, he's a guy that we should pursue. And lo and behold, the Red Sox ultimately acquire Khalil Lee in that deal, and they ship him to the Mets. That's basically how it works. So they were getting Lee, and they remembered, oh, Zach Scott, now with the Mets, he really liked Khalil Lee. Maybe we could get a couple pieces out of him for this guy. So I think it's one of those things that the Royals probably looked at it as parting with Khalil Lee and a piece or two to get Benintendi. And then the Mets were like, hey, guys, Khalil Lee, we'll take him. Send him on over. And they were able to work that out with Boston. So yeah, I think it's an exciting player for sure. And, he does another thing that I didn't mention. He does have good strike zone knowledge. So he does get on base at a decent clip. So that helps. Mm-hmm. But part of that too may hurt and make him strike out more because he's trying to see more pitches. And it's something that Brandon Nimmo had trouble with, early in his career and in his minor league career, is that like it was almost as if he was looking for the walk rather than, taking the walk if it's there. And we need to make sure Lee doesn't kind of fall into that trap where he's looking to draw walks. He has natural raw power. He has the ability to loft the ball. So be willing to be aggressive and go after it early in counts. You don't need to see 5-6 pitches every at bat. That's not necessary. If the first pitch is what you want, be ready to jump on it. So that's something that I think he'll need to work on, just being a little more aggressive. But he's young enough that it's very, very fixable.
Yeah, that's a great point too. In the comparison with Nemo, I do see the similarities now that you say that, but still a strong size. He's 5'10", 170, very much in an MLB type form with his body, and he's going to continue to grow. He might even build more strength, get more pop in his bat than what we've seen. He can hit for the home run ball. He's done in the minors. Now just more about, as we mentioned, not just with contact, but more consistency at the plate going forward. But now getting on to the number 7th prospect you have ranked, and this is one that I've seen many people talk about this offseason as possibly being part of a bigger deal or something along those lines. Should it be at the right price? That being a third baseman, Mark Vientos. We've seen him already plenty in spring training to start off 2021 for the Mets, but at a really strong 6'4", 185 pounds. This is a guy that there's some belief that maybe Vientos isn't necessarily going to be a third baseman at the MLB level. Is he going to be at first? We've already seen that being toyed with in camp. So what are your initial thoughts about Vientos? He's a guy that I am very enticed with, and I know that many Mets fans and people out there are viewing him quite highly.
Yeah, I think Vientos, I find it interesting that he's trying first base and Brett Beatty is not, because when I talk to some scouts here and there, it's kind of flipped, where some scouts think, Brett Beatty's future could potentially be at first base, whereas Vientos was more not a good third base, and he has enough arm to play third base, but more of just, an average guy there. But the Mets might envision him, long term at first, and obviously that would be a problem here for the long term, assuming Alonso doesn't fall off the face of the earth, or Dom Smith, and the Mets are pretty well stocked at first base. But
Yeah.
as far as like an offensive player, super exciting bat. I mean, this is a guy that shows the ability to consistently barrel up balls. He produces some of the best exit velocities in the organization. I mean, he was consistently, despite his numbers being so, like he would barrel the ball up 100 plus miles an hour pretty routinely. So he has the ability to hit the ball very hard to all fields. He's got to work on his approach at the plate. He has a tendency to chase, especially a lot of pitches breaking balls down. And I think it was even today that I saw him chase a breaking ball kind of almost.
Yep.
So he's got to work on his approach for sure, but he's got natural hitting ability, natural plus power, plus raw power, and he can do it to all fields. So he's an enticing bat. Where he ultimately plays defensively will tell his kind of future here. And kind of to your point at the top, he could be a trade candidate if the right, arm becomes available, or if they're looking for a long-term third baseman, if they're not sold on a JD Davis or another prospect in the system. Vientos could be a pretty valuable piece of a trade, I think. And, Sandy has even implied this winter that they wanted to hang on to their top 6 prospects. It's like, all right, well, let me do the math there. Oh, Vientos happens to fall right outside. So I think Vientos is probably like the best prospect that the Mets have that they'd be willing to realistically discuss in trades, at least at this point in time. As time goes on, more guys might become available. When you strengthen the farm system, you have the ability to part with these guys. Why the Padres got to the point that they were, where like they built up so many pieces. They had like 10 top 100 prospects.
It's ridiculous.
Like their system was loaded, so they could trade their number 8 guy, and he's the number 2 or 3 for his new team. So the Mets need to get their system to that point. And right now it's a bottom 10 system in the game. There's no question about that. And, they need to continue to work at it. And they lost some guys because Brody Van Wagenen decided to trade away prospects. Jared Kelenic hit a home run today.
Don't remind me.
I'm sick of it. But no, he traded away some prospects with, Justin Dunn was traded away, Anthony Kay, Simeon Wins Richardson. So the Mets have drafted very, very well.
Yes, they have.
It's just a matter of keeping these guys, building up a system, and really having that foundation. So that way you have Steve Cohen's money on top of it. It's the dream where you draft, develop, sign these guys in international free agency, and be willing to spend to sign the right guys. And then when it all comes together at the major league level, then, okay, well, now we just don't have a right fielder or a left fielder or whatever. Steve Cohen, open your pocketbooks for whoever the best free agent left fielder is that year. And that's ultimately how you'll become the East Coast Dodgers, which is the dream. I mean, the Dodgers historically don't actually spend big in free agency. Like Mookie Betts was their big fish, and then they fell into Trevor Bauer this winter, and thank you for helping the Mets dodged a bullet there. But before that, I mean, they basically spent on AJ Pollock. Like everything was homegrown, and that's how you're really going to have that sustained success. If you want to just go buy every free agent, you might win that year. Maybe you'll win for 2 years, but then once those players start to regress, you still have to pay them. You're still stuck paying them. So you'll take a dive from there. So that's why building up a farm system to me is so important, because you have to maintain that to have that success over a 5-6 year run.
No, you're exactly right. And that is something that we're going to see more evident over these next, 3-5+ years and beyond, with Steve Cohen and Sandy Alderson as the new regime. And when you look at the Dodgers too, like they just made smart moves, and they brought guys and made them from, say, a nobody to a somebody. Like Max Muncy is a perfect prime example that first comes to my mind. This was a guy that was borderline and was he even going to stay in the MLB? Then he comes to the Dodgers and it's like, bam. The Yankees are another prime example of doing that every single year where they add depth, organizational depth, and knowing that injuries inevitably happen. Like Gio Urshela is another great example. So many guys, each and every year, they have them step up and they let them do some fine tweaks in their game, and ultimately makes a drastic difference. And also with a winning culture constantly, it doesn't hurt the cause. So, yeah, no, you're exactly right. And I'm looking forward to the Mets having this sustained success, not just within the team, but also within the organization from single A ball all the way up to triple A.
Yeah, absolutely. And analytics plays a big role in that too.
That's putting it lightly.
Yeah. So, I mean, you just named two of probably the 3 or 4 most analytically driven teams in baseball. So I know people like to crap on analytics, and there is a line when it comes to, in-game analytics versus, roster building analytics. And yeah, exactly. Lindor, hey man, Lindor could do whatever the hell he wants as far as if you tell him to stand here and he says no, you got it, Francisco. I trust you. But the numbers are obviously big for team building, and the Mets actually brought in a guy from the Dodgers to head up their new analytics department.
Yes, they did.
So Ben Zosmer, which interestingly is like, he does like math to predict like the Golden Globes. Like that's his like passion. It's a little weird, but he's a math guy. That's part of it. But the Mets are now starting to amp that up. They brought in like pitching coordinators, outfielder coordinators, hitting coordinators, guys that work for Driveline and, other analytically based places like that. So they're on their way. And I think that's another thing where Steve Cohen's wallet will help out, because he'll be able to go ahead and, buy a guy from another organization to up his analytics. So I think analytics will play a huge role going forward in, the organizational building for sure.
100%. I completely agree. I'm really looking forward to it. But another segue now onto your 6th ranked prospect, that being one that I've seen a lot of talk about over the past couple of months too, just with how much upside he has, that being in right-hand pitcher JT Ginn, the 21-year-old drafted in the 2nd round just in 2020, as we know, is already turning heads quite a bit. Already just a year removed, is already a top 6 prospect for you. And yes, I know the Mets have a depleted farm, but it's still impressive no less to have him just a year removed already here in the top 10. So what are your initial thoughts on JT Ginn at a solid 6'2", 200 pounds? I'm not exactly sure what his upside is, so I would love to hear your thoughts on it.
So Ginn's an interesting one. So he had Tommy John surgery in March of last year. So he's kind of on a very similar recovery path as Noah Syndergaard. In fact, they actually were training at Cressy's Sports in Florida together during the offseason. So Noah and JT were spending a lot of time together, rehabbing and all that. So he was getting some knowledge from Syndergaard, which doesn't help. But Ginn, if he didn't, so he was a 1st-round pick out of high school by the Dodgers, 27, 28 overall, something like that, and passed on signing and decided, I'm going to Mississippi State. And he went there, was freshman of the year, all that good stuff. And then he got injured, and the Mets were able to get him in the 2nd round. And to be honest with you, if he had not gotten injured, Ginn would not have been available for the Mets' 1st-round pick. He would have been a top 10, top 15 pick without question. I mean, he has a bowling ball of a sinker that just flies at you at 97, 98 miles an hour, and just the bottom comes out of it. He has a plus curveball. His changeup, again, kind of like I've mentioned, and it'll be a repeated pattern here. His changeup does need a little work. So he has a floor of an elite, late inning reliever and an upside of a number 2 starter. So he's got big time stuff. I'm a believer in JT Ginn. I know some people close to him, and he's an absolute gamer, hard worker, and he's a guy that really gets into the analytics too of, he does Driveline things. He does things to focus on, the spin rates on his stuff, like all that. That's stuff that matters to him. And, another pitching prospect that we'll talk about shortly matters to him too. But yeah, JT Ginn is a very exciting guy. Obviously, he won't pitch until probably mid-season or so this year. But the Mets brought him to big league camp just the other day, so that way he can rehab with, the Mets training staff. And also, again, anytime you can take a young player and put them in the same room, in this breathing the same air as Jacob deGrom, as Marcus Stroman, as Cookie Carrasco, guys like that is only going to benefit these guys. So yeah, JT's an exciting guy, and once he gets on the mound, I think he'll make a pretty quick ascent through the minor leagues. I think he's an advanced arm, and yeah, we just got to get him on the mound. And by all accounts, we're on schedule for June-ish, from what I've been told. So we'll see, how it goes. But he's in line. He's doing really well.
Oh, this is music in my ears. I didn't realize just how big of a deal JT might be. Like, to see him knowing that he very well could have been a very strong pick in the first round if he wasn't hurt. That's awesome. There's nothing better than taking advantage of a situation where, yes, might be slightly more risk, but the upside is way beyond the risk that you're taking to begin with. If you can land a guy in a second, third, fourth, etc. type of round just off of a slight setback, Tommy John is natural. I feel like at this point in time, but most pitchers, is like, if you don't have it, it's almost like, why? Like, how did this not happen by now? So it's inevitable, it feels like. So, I think that this very well could be a huge upside. And I'm already starting to get more in the favor of, like, out of the prospects the Mets currently have, you just swayed me enough to say that he's probably more so on my untouchable list for a lot of different scenarios versus, say, nothing against Vientos at all, but between the two, I'm favoring JT.
100% agree. And that's kind of where I think you're drawing that line. Like when Sandy said top 5, 6 guys, I'm like, all right, well, we stop at JT again then. Makes sense to me.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. But getting on now to the 5th prospect, a guy that we all have been really infatuated with since he's been drafted in 2019. At least I know I have, is that being Brett Baty. When Brady was first drafted just in 2019, the first round, many believed, okay, could this be the next David Wright, quote unquote? Not that anyone is ever going to be like the captain, but to have that next long-term third baseman, Baty was checking off the boxes. Some people were a little surprised by his selection in the Mets, where they landed him in the first round, but he still has plenty of upside. At the time recording this today, he had 2 RBIs in spring training and the Cardinals lost. That's still good. Opposite field hit there. 21 years of age at a strong 6'3". I'm really enticed by him. So what is your stance on Baty, and what is your expectation, as we already alluded to a little bit? Do you think that he makes more sense in a couple of years at third base? Do you think that first base could be more appealing? And if that is the case, how much do you expect him to actually have a future with the Mets because of them being blocked? The only position when we look at this infield, for the most part, that doesn't have long-term certainty currently is third base. Even second base, you can make the exception that McNeil, if he's there for the most part, he ain't going anywhere anytime soon. So what's your stance on him?
Yeah. So when Baty was drafted, he was an older high school kid. He got held back in school, not because of intelligence reasons, but his mom, I think, was the principal of the school or something. So they held him back in like 5th grade or something like that.
Okay.
So he was a 19-year-old high school draft pick. So he was, older than your typical guy, which in the scouting community does ding you. I mean, there's a couple things that, whether it's valid or not, it's just what scouts believe. It's short pitchers and things like that. Like, they just kind of ding you a little bit no matter what, just because of it. But, this is a guy, Gatorade Player of the Year, had true plus raw power to all fields. And he's shown the ability in showcases and things like that to hit home runs out to left, to hit home runs to right, and then straight away to center. And you obviously, like you mentioned, the opposite field double today, just showed his ability to just push a ball the other way with authority. So he has power. Contact ability is a bit of a question too with him. I do think he has a bit of a long swing, which sometimes, is part of the power dynamic. But, what will his batting average be is obviously something to think about. But the Mets, you're what you kind of learn when you cover the draft and you cover the minor leagues is like, there's an organizational type in a sense. And the Mets type when they draft is, we can help you make a little better contact. We can't, it's really tough to teach someone to have better strike zone discipline. That's an eye thing. Like, that's something you either have or you don't. I mean, look at Ahmed Rosario, prime example. Like, he never really had a good eye, and the Mets tried to develop it and never had the ability to. And he just doesn't draw walks. It's not part of his game. But if you if you tell me what the Mets are looking for, they're looking for a guy that offensively, at least a guy that has a good eye and has power. We'll figure out the contact stuff and make it good enough. And then, defense, they obviously up the middle. It's very important to them. We'll get into someone next. That's a big time up the middle defender.
Mm-hmm.
But defensively with Beatty, it's mixed. So I have some scouts that tell me they think that he's a first baseman, like you said. And if that's the case, very similar to Vientos just a few minutes ago, what's his future here if he's a first baseman? Pete and Dom, by all accounts, aren't going anywhere. Hopefully you'll get the DH one day, so that way you could utilize both of those guys.
Preach. Yes.
Get it done. But Beatty, I'll tell you this, he is a gym rat. If he doesn't make it as a third baseman, it won't be because of lack of effort. He works incredibly hard. So they feel he's made some strides, and we'll see kind of where it goes. But third base, maybe he can kind of pull a Pete Alonso in a sense at first base, where when Pete was in the minor leagues, I remember writing like, this guy's not even going to be capable of playing first base in the major leagues. Forget be any good at it. And then his rookie year, he obviously came out and was an above average first baseman. And he fell back a little bit in 2020. And I think ultimately you're looking at an average at best guy. If you could pull that off with Beatty, I'll take an average defensive third baseman that hits, 25 plus homers, gets on base at even if it's a 350, 360 clip. Like, that's my kind of guy too. I can get behind that.
It's funny because when I think about Beatty and the size that he brings to another sizable third baseman, like, what do you say that isn't too far off as like the best scenario possible of comparing him to a guy that the Mets were connected to playing this offseason, that being Chris Bryant? Like when I see a lot of similarities there. Bryant isn't a slouch at third base, but he's not a constant Gold Glover either. He has a size, he has versatility, something that Beatty might have as he continues to develop. So I like a lot about Beatty and his game. The strength is definitely there. Opposite field, I love Michael Conforto is my favorite player. So when you can spread the field in any way, sign me up. So I'm curious what his utilization is going to be and what direction the Mets go in with third base as it is, with JD being the guy right now. And if JD is really improved, like Lindor is speaking glowingly of him, that he has helped teach him this offseason. If that holds true, then, we're in for an interesting scenario with these prospects where when you have guys blocked, it's a good problem to have, knowing that maybe you can make something bigger come out of it.
That's exactly what I was going to say. If the worst thing that happens is the Mets have way too many good players, then I think that would be a thing the Mets fans will be able to get behind, that they have too many good players. And, you figure it out then. Beatty, develop him as a third baseman, see how far it'll take him. He'll probably start in high A this year, which is Brooklyn. And I'm going to get that wrong a million times this year because they switched up what the affiliates are a little bit. St. Lucie was always high A. Now St. Lucie is low A. So, yeah, he'll start probably in high A, play third base next to Ronnie Mauricio at shortstop probably. And, the Brooklyn team. So if you're in the New York area and, you're a Mets fan, the Brooklyn team might be pretty stacked with prospects. Like, I think a good percentage of the top 5 or so might be in Brooklyn.
Okay. Yeah, that's going to be exciting. I've yet to even attend a game in Brooklyn, so I'm hoping that I can actually do that over the next year or so.
Yeah, Cyclones games are a blast. You go to the boardwalk, you have the original Nathan's, all that stuff where they do the hot dog eating contest. And it's legitimately, you walk on the boardwalk, and at the end of the boardwalk, you're like baseball stadium. Like,
That's
it's literally
so cool.
on the boardwalk. So it's a really, really cool thing. And I've been going there obviously for years, since its inception. And it's fun to see how hitters do there too, because the way it's set up, you have the water over right field. So there's always a breeze coming in from the water, which, has always dinged left-handed hitters. Like Conforto couldn't put it out in Brooklyn. Nimmo couldn't put it out in Brooklyn, like to right. So they struggled there. But I remember seeing Pete Alonso right out of University of Florida. I went to a game, he was probably there a couple weeks, and guy threw a fastball away, and Pete just went like this. Like, it looked like he just stuck his bat out at it. Boom, piss missile out to right field, like no question home run. And it's just like, people don't hit home runs out the right in Brooklyn. Pete basically just like stuck his bat out and did. So that's how you know his power was always special. But yeah, Brooklyn is, if you're a Mets fan and you're in the New York area, hitting up a Brooklyn game is a must. And this year especially, you'll get to see some of their best prospects.
Awesome. Well, I'm definitely going to add it to the list then for sure. So getting on now to the prospect, another one that I'm awfully enticed by. I think he's arguably the biggest untouchable when you look at outside of one other player because of positional need and how much hype is going around him, that being a Pete Crow Armstrong. Already as an 18-year-old is making a decent appearance at the time recording this in spring training. Hasn't done much yet, but between I love his batting stance, I love the type of kind of swagger that he brings. A solid 6'1", lefty hitter, and is believed from projections that I've seen as the first round pick from 2020 as being a potential leadoff hitter, like a Nimmo, if you will, in that outfield, but actually has more depth to his defensive game. Something that Nimmo at this point in time has worked religiously on, that we know, but we haven't seen too much of that yet. That's what we're hoping for in this upcoming year. Can he take that next step? One of the biggest facets and aspects of Crow Armstrong's game is his defense and that upside there. So what are your initial thoughts on him? What do you believe his role will be for the Mets? Do you think he's probably one of the biggest no-nos in regards to a deal for them going forward? And do you believe that he's going to be more of a contact hitter, which seems evident right now? Or do you think he can actually get some more power as he builds himself as a person over the next couple of years?
Yeah, for sure. Crow Armstrong for me is one of the no-nos as far as trade goes, for sure.
Yeah.
I want to hang on to. And, when I assessed the draft class last year, before the draft happened, Crow Armstrong to me was the best defensive player in the draft, period. College, high school.
Wow.
Name a position, he was the best. And the Mets, when he went to Instructs this fall, Jared Banner, who at the time was the director of player development, he now was let go. When Steve Cohen came on, they let go basically Brody and everyone that Brody brought in. Jared Banner was part of that. And he said this past fall that if Pete Crow Armstrong, if you needed him to play a big league center field defensively today, he could.
No.
And that's right out of high school. So this is a guy that defensively has Gold Glove potential. And I don't throw around like Gold Gloves. I don't throw around, MVP candidate, things like that. I do not throw those kind of things around because I try not to set lofty expectations, but from just the defensive standpoint, he could win a Gold Glove. He's that good in center field. Natural actions, shows the ability to go back and in on balls and chase the gap. He's an athlete for sure, and like you said, a contact-based approach at the plate. But I think there is some surprising pop in there. I don't think he'll ever be, that 25, 30 home run guy, but he might be a 15 to 20 home run guy when things really, come together for him. He's still got to physically mature a little bit, but, at Instructs, he hit a home run out to right field at 109 miles an hour exit velocity that they were tracking that. So I was like, to hit the ball that hard and hit it like that, there's something in there. And, maybe his power was a little underrated coming into the draft process because, this past draft was a tough one because there really wasn't any baseball, right? A few college, you got a couple weeks of college baseball at the beginning and then that stopped. You got a couple weeks of high school baseball. So there wasn't a sample size to really go off, but you went off the years past and he's obviously went to a legendary high school with, Jack Flaherty from the Cardinals, Lucas Giolito, Harvard Westlake's a big time high school. And Crow Armstrong's been on Team USA since he was 12. So he's been in the limelight, in showcases, in these kind of things for a very long time. I think he's an excellent prospect. And from a, defense and speed, that's there. You're good. From an offensive standpoint, he's contact-based, to your point, a leadoff type hitter. And if he taps into a little pop, great. I'm not looking for Pete Crow Armstrong to be a guy that's trying to put the ball out of the park. I'm looking for him get on base, use his legs, and field the hell out of center field.
Yeah, and I think that's a dream come true for us Mets fans, especially, not to dwell on that, but losing Kelenic is something that is always going to hurt us, not just because of the bat, but it's not like he's a slouch defensively. So having Crow Armstrong drafted over this past year or so, I'm extent for him. In my mind, he really does come off as that leadoff guy that is going to help you defensively, that could be in there all 9 innings, versus the Mets currently constructed. One of the biggest reasons why they add guys like Pilar or Almora Jr. is so that they can be more late game defensive replacements should Nimmo still have his struggles. Dom Smith, we know the story there. He's athletic, but he's still a first baseman at the end of the day. So I'm very enticed by him, to say the least. But getting on now to the third ranked prospect you have, and this is one where I could maybe argue would switch with Pete, that being in Ronnie Mauricio. And Mauricio is another guy where it's like, what are you going to do with him? In my mind, he's the one where I want to know your stance, because when I look at top prospects for the Mets that I think are most susceptible of being dealt, top 10, if there's a guy that really stands out, is no one even close to Ronnie Mauricio with the whole Lindor situation. Now, there's a belief that Mauricio, as we know, the Mets signed him back in 2017. And as soon as he had his first spring training with the Mets, I was like, who is this Mauricio kid? He just stood out right away to me. The size has always been there. He's 6'3", 166, probably bigger than that now in comparison to what I'm reading. 19 years of age. Like, what's your stance on Mauricio? Because he had a hit today. He had an RBI in spring training against the Cardinals, and there's many believing that he's going to be a third baseman, that he's too big for short, right? So if that's the case, okay, maybe he could have a long-term future. But then what are you doing with Beatty? What are you doing with Vientos? It's like these constant questions that hopefully will be answered over this next year or so.
Yeah, those questions always resolve themselves.
Yes.
I mean, ultimately, like, these guys, I'm telling you about their tools and what they could be, and you might never hear Mark Vientos' name again. That kind of thing. Like, that happens in the minor leagues. But Mauricio, he's a big shortstop, and he has the natural actions to be a shortstop, and it's not even frowned upon to be big at that position anymore. I mean, you got guys like Carlos Correa now. So, like, there are bigger players who do play the position now. But I do think third base could definitely be in Mauricio's future. He has enough arm to do it. There's no question about that. From an offensive standpoint, he shows some, above average raw power. He shows above average at, contact ability. Just the problem is he hasn't put it together in game yet. So, when he goes to batting practice and when he does training, like, everything's groovy. He just hasn't put it together on the field yet. So that's a lot of people actually rank Mauricio number 1 or number 2. And I still like him because I see the tools. I see what he's capable of being. But I just like a couple guys more, so he dropped down for me to 3. But I still believe in the tool shed that he has. Not an athlete, that's the one thing. So he's not running. Like, he's not stealing bases for you. He's not, going to have incredible range at any position. He's just not that type of athlete. But he's more of a hitter, and he's just got to put it together on the field. Because, I mean, go look at how he's hit. I mean, he's kind of, he's still young. He's 19 years old. Yeah. So, like, he's got so much time. So I try not to dump on these kids so much. Like, all right, he was 17 years old playing in full season ball, and he only hit 260. It's like, in the scheme of things, that's really not that bad. Especially, I mean, he's not a Wander Franco, right, from Tampa Bay. It's like an utter, like, machine. Like, I think Mauricio still does have, all-star potential if he can put this together on field. So I'm not rushing him out the door, but, like you said, it's something that in a year or two, you might have to revisit and see where you're at as far as, him and Beatty and Vientos, and kind of how does that puzzle fit. And, hopefully they have Lindor under contract. I'm confident that will happen. But
I hope I am. I have a newspaper and a jersey already. Like,
I've held off on the jersey until I get the extension just to be safe.
What my brother said.
Yeah. But they're going to sign Lindor. I'm not worried about it. But, just for the sake of conversation, until they have it done, they don't. And, Mauricio's a guy that could potentially be a shortstop long term if you don't keep Lindor. But I think they're going to keep him, and that kind of pushes him over to third. I don't think he has a future at second base. I don't think that position will really transition too well for him. But if I'm the Mets, you keep grooming him as a shortstop, just because he's got to figure his bat out. He's got to figure out in-game how to turn those tools that he has offensively into real production. So let him play shortstop where he is most comfortable, at least in single A. And then once he gets to double A and triple A, start dabbling him in third some. And if you really want to try second, because it's the minor leagues. Why not? Like, go ahead. But ultimately, I look at it as let him be a shortstop until he's just not able to do it anymore.
Yeah, I agree. That's a great point too, to make sure that you're not putting too much weight on his shoulders early. You know, let him get in a groove of things, and then when the time's right, because how many big leaguers do we see as it is where they start out their career, say, as a left fielder, and then they transition right to a first baseman or something along those lines? Like, it happens all the time.
Mookie Betts was a shortstop in the early minors. He ended up in right field, center field, and then right field. Juan Lagares from the Mets was a shortstop, and then he became a center fielder and obviously was really good there. So it's one of those things that I really don't worry about when I'm assessing prospects, and when I'm doing this, the major league team is really not on my mind at all, to be totally honest. I know it's, for this, purpose, we're talking big picture, but generally speaking, it's just like, he's a shortstop. Let him play shortstop, so that way he's not in his head thinking about, the new actions that he learned to have to play third base while also trying to figure out his bat. Just do what you're comfortable with defensively. We'll figure out the defense later. When you get further along and it's at the point where we realize maybe you're getting closer to being a major leaguer, then it's like, all right, you got your bat under control. You're looking good. But now we need you to play some third base because we got Francisco Lindor. So sorry, you're not playing that position anymore.
Yeah, and again, the beauty of all these things is that it's a good problem to have at the end of the day. So you can't go wrong here. And Mauricio, I'm excited. I'm very excited to see what's going to happen with him. If he's going to be with the team long term, and if so, what is his utilization to be? So it's something that I'm sure that you'll be touching on more as the year goes on and how the season goes on for the Mets. But getting on now to your second ranked prospect, and probably easily to an extent my favorite one. I like a lot of these guys, but after doing a deep dive, and this is a player that I did a full-on breakdown video of, same thing with the number one here, but Matt Allen, man. He is really becoming something quickly and the talk of the town for us Mets fans. In camp for spring training, drafted in the third round in 2019, as we know, definitely was more than a third round talent. But between looking for around $4 million and the commitment to the University of Florida, he falls all the way to the third round. Teams didn't want to take that risk on him. But the Mets wrote Brody. I will say this about Brody Van Wagenen. As much as we will gripe and give him a hard time for the trades and being so aggressive in the way that he was really depleting the farm, he was not bad at drafting whatsoever. And this was such a smart pick by them, really spending all the bonus pool money that you had left to make this work for Allen, but it's already paying off in dividends. He's only 19 years of age, but he's already 6'3", 225. He's being groomed by Jacob deGrom as we speak. That relationship has been building for months now. So what's your stance on Matthew Allen? Why is he number two for you? And really what separates him from a lot of the other prospects, not just within the Mets organization pitching wise, but around the league? Where is your viewpoint on him now and going forward?
I love Matt Allen. When we were going into the 2019 draft, I had Matt Allen as a top 10 player in the class. I had him ahead of Beatty. I had Beatty, I think, at 15 or something like that. But the MLB draft's a weird animal. It's not like the NFL draft in any way.
No, not at all.
Like, I hate to say it, you don't really draft best available. It's just not really a thing. It's kind of like best available that's willing to sign for the amount of money that you want to give. And a credit to Brody for sure in regards to the strategy that he brought forth. But let's not take it away from Tommy Tanis and Mark Tremuta, who run the draft. That they're the heads of the
absolutely
department. And there's an area scout actually who they just brought back. So he was here for a few years, and then he left to start like a baseball technology business, Baseball Cloud, and that's John Updike, and he is now back as a scout for the Mets. So John Updike actually built a relationship with Matt Allen and his family from his sophomore year of high school. So there was a rapport there because, these scouts start freshman, sophomore year. They're looking at you early. And Allen's been on their radar. John Updike set up that relationship with his family. So it helps in negotiations when it's like, I know this guy has my best interests at heart, and it's not just someone saying I'm drafting you, you're, an Astro or you're whatever. So like that does help. And from then when we talk about just talent, he has a big league body today. He had a big league body in high school. He has a big league delivery. It's smooth. He distributes his weight well. Like he's a natural. There's no other way to put it. He's a natural. Like it looks so easy when you watch him throw 96 to 97 miles or touch 97. It's just easy. It's not high effort. His curveball has elite spin rate.
Yeah,
big time
plus pitch.
Yeah, big time two-plane thing. And he even talked about his changeup. Again, we're going back to the changeup here.
Yep.
Talked about his changeup, something he needed to work on. And he said that last year at the alternate site and at Instructs, he felt better about his changeup than his curveball, which is super interesting because his curveball is a big-time pitch. So if you're telling me the changeup is I wouldn't even go, I would never say as good as his curveball, but if you tell me it's even close on par with his curveball, you got something special here, man, to be like special. I mean, the one of the guys the Mets hired, I think it was Kevin Howard. I'm trying to remember who had a quote on him just yesterday or the day before. Justin Toscano tweeted it. So you could fact check who actually said it.
Okay.
But said, reminds me of Shane Bieber coming through the minor leagues.
Yes.
He came over from Cleveland. So I think it was Kevin Howard. And he said, reminds me of Shane Bieber when he was coming through. So, when I wrote this, I had no clue about Matt Allen's progression with his changeup. Now that I have that,
oh, wow.
I called him a number 2 starter a couple weeks ago, a future number 2 starter. And I don't think there's any chance he's a reliever. Like with JT Ginn, he still has to work on some things to become a starter and has that floor of like, all right, JT Ginn could be a big time closer if all things, fail as a starter. Matt Allen is a starting pitcher in every sense of the word. I honestly don't know how I could pick holes in his game. I don't think he gets enough love in the prospect world. I think I've seen him as high as 70 or so in top 100 lists. Like, I'd love for someone to tell me how there are 70 better prospects in baseball than Matt Allen. Is he top 20? Maybe not, but he's got to be a top 50 guy in my eyes, no question.
Yeah, I think how he goes about his business as it is, like he looks so mature, even just hearing his interviews now through the Mets.
If you told me after I watched that interview, if you told me that was a guy that's been in the bigs for 6-7 years, I'd believe you. Like, yeah, he's got media down. Like, again, how can we I'd love for someone to tell me what I can poke a hole in for Matt Allen, because I don't see it.
The only holes that were with Matt Allen were his cost going into his draft. That, let's be real, that was the only reason as to why he faltered. He was deemed by many scouts as the top pitching prospect coming out of the draft. If you're looking, according to people for MLB Network going into the draft, they had him ranked as their number 1 starting pitcher coming out of high school. So, like, when you're getting that kind of praise for all that line and you land him in the 3rd round in this manner, it's unbelievably exciting. I think when you look at the rotation, Allen is already, in my mind, could very well just be 2 years away. And knowing that what the Mets are currently shaked up with their rotation, what is the future looking like for guys? Carrasco, as we know, has a couple years left on his deal. Syndergaard is going to be a pending UFA. I'm assuming he'll be extended, though. Stroman, I think, is a little bit more of a wild card just because he needs to prove his worth a little bit more for the Mets, because Thor, we all know what we can expect with him. How he bounces back from Tommy John will be key, but he's built himself within the organization. So Stroman is the one where I think this season will really be crucial to him getting extended big time. But outside of that, you still look at this current rotation and that 5th spot having uncertainty. Allen, in just a few short years, could be making a fairly significant impact on this team, and probably one bigger than the other guys available while their window is still open. So at least for the next 3 to 5 years. So that, in my mind, is awesome. But Allen just checks off all the boxes. When I did my video on him, I'm like, he does have the potential in a lot of ways in my eyes as being an ace for the Mets down the road. And when you have that ability for a guy that you land in the 3rd round, that's a great thing, to put it lightly.
Yeah, I really want to get to the bottom of how that all transpired. I can't get a good answer out of anybody. It's really not fair. But I'm trying to get to the bottom of it, because the word was he wanted $4 million to sign, which
correct
is legit first round money. People didn't want to do it. And at one point, though, I stay off Twitter during the draft because the picks get spoiled by everyone. Jeff Passett, whoever.
Yeah.
They spoil all the picks, and I can't deal with that. I study for the draft for months and months. The last thing I want to do is have it on my have my phone going off about every pick before it happens.
Exactly.
Jeff Passan said it was like 29th, whatever. The Cubs were really good. He said the Cubs intend to take Matt Allen here. And then they didn't. They took, I don't even remember, somebody else. And once Matt Allen fell out of the first round, I said, this happens every year. There's going to, and it'll happen this year too. There's someone in the top 10 to 20 prospects that won't go in the first round. Everyone will get excited, like, oh, take this guy and sign him. But typically those guys mean they're heading off to school and they don't want to do that. They don't want to sign and go pro now. So that's what I assumed. Once the first round ended, that, all right, Matt Allen's going to Florida in 3 years, he'll be the number 1 pick and we'll be talking about him then. And then I'm listening to the draft on, MLB at Bat, whatever, because day 2 and day 3, they only do audio. It's not on TV. And I remember they hear New York Mets select draft ID, blah, 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 whatever his draft ID number was. Allen Matthew, right-handed pitcher, Seminole High School in Florida. And I go, Matt Allen, is there another Matt Allen? Let me just go double check and look through that. There's not like some other Matt Allen that I'm not thinking about. I was stunned. And I was just like, well, if they did it here, they have to have figured out something financially with him. And then, of course, it all started to make
2.5 million, I believe, off the top of my head.
Yeah, he ended up getting 2.5, which that's where I want to get to the bottom of. Where was the disconnect between 4 and 2.5? That's a significant difference. It's not like he was looking for 4 and signed for 3.5. Like, that's a big difference. So there was either misinformation out there or something. But then, of course, the Mets followed up with college senior after college senior, including Jake Mangum being the most interesting of them, who they took in the 4th round, who, we won't expand too much on, but he made my top 15 or 16 prospects, all-time SEC hits leader. Like, he was their first of their senior signs to save money for Allen. But that whole thing, I'm actually, I won't tease too much, but we'll have someone on the podcast in the next couple weeks that I think can maybe shed a little light on this. And
awesome.
We'll see what we can figure out.
Okay, well, I'm looking forward to chiming in then. That's awesome. But okay, so we hit everything with Allen. Now, to finish things off, the guy who has an amazing now new headshot pick for the Mets in spring training. I don't know if you saw already with the hat to the side.
Fullback.
Looking like a G. He really is. He looks so stocky from like the neck up. That being Francisco Alvarez, the catching prospect, the guy that was toyed with plenty, at least in the offseason, where the Mets make a trade. Chris Bryant, the key piece had to be Francisco Alvarez. That was the reports that was indicating. Same thing with the Reds to an extent with Suarez. This is according to Mike Puma when he started touching on this. But Alvarez is a guy that would never make any sense for the Mets to part ways within a deal with Bryant just by himself as a rental. When you look at the Lindor and Carrasco deal, it's like you didn't give up a prospect that high by any stretch of the imagination. The highest prospect you won, I believe, was number 9. So I'm like, no way, Jose, that's not happening. So then Alvarez stays with the club. I don't expect him going anywhere. They need catching depth, and he 19 years of age already, free agent signing back in 2018. He's sizable when it comes to his actual, weight, 220 at only 5'11", but he has a lot of potential behind him. From everything that I've broken down about Alvarez, he seems like he very well could be the next long-term catcher for this Mets club. They have not had in a while. Like, McCann's great. I absolutely love James McCann, but it looks like Alvarez could be that perfect segue towards the end of McCann's contract should he not be with them after that. So what are your initial stances on Alvarez, and what separates him from everyone else in this Mets organization prospect-wise?
I put Alvarez 1. I actually had Allen closer to being 1 than probably many people would think. But at the time I said to myself, Joe, if you had to pick out of these guys, who's most likely to make an all-star team? Who would it be? And I responded to myself, it's Alvarez. If I had to pick a guy that's most likely to be an all-star, his position helps a lot because Matt Allen can be an all-star too. There's no question about it. But there's a lot of really good pitchers. So he could be really good and still not make an all-star team just because there's more pitchers. Catching is obviously much more scarce throughout the game. And, from just a tool standpoint, real deal as a hitter, so advanced for his age, shows, great contact to all fields, has power, and shows the ability to jump on the inside ball and pull it for power, which is something that does take time with a lot of prospects. where, Dom Smith is a prime example of a guy that it wasn't until maybe 2019 that he was confident enough to turn around that inside fastball and pull it for a homer, which is important. And Alvarez has that ability now. So he's a truly, truly big time bat. And defensively, I know he said the other day in his press conference that his bat is ahead of his glove, and he's correct. That's true. But I don't think he's a guy that I don't look at him as someone that needs to move off the catcher position at any point. I think he's going to be able to stand, be there. He does need some work with blocking balls because he does lack a little bit of lateral agility. So that's kind of his flaw defensively from my perspective. But he's a good receiver. Reports from Instructs and the alternate site from last year showed like he was showing the ability to frame a ball pretty well. He's got good pop times on his throw to second. So he's got, a slightly above average arm, not a big time one, but his pop times help. So that's just the transfer from glove to throw. I'm in on Alvarez. I think the Mets' top two prospects are really, really, really good. And then, I think you then take a step down when you get to the Mauricio and Crow Armstrong and Beatty tier and JT Ginn, of course, as well. But to me, Alvarez and Allen are the separators in the organization. And really the tiebreaker, in a sense, to me was position scarcity. The fact that, I asked around, like, is Alvarez going to be a first baseman? Because there's a lot of catching prospects that end up first baseman. It's just natural. And I was told he's a catcher. So, okay, if you tell me he's a catcher, I think he has all-star upside and he should start. I think he'll be in low A to start. So he's maybe a little further away, but I mean, the guy is raked everywhere he's been. Obviously it's not been much, but he's raked everywhere against guys that are older than him. So he hasn't had an issue with older competition. So I'm in on Alvarez. I can't wait to follow him this year. And it's cool to see him in the spring games. Like, it's nice to see all these guys get at bats just because there was no minor league season last year. So I don't care about what they do. It doesn't matter. They're not competing for a job. Anything they do is just, cake. So to me, I look at Alvarez. It's cool to see him out there. I'd like to see him behind the plate. I know he DH'd today, but let him catch some of these guys. Even if he's not catching a DeGrom or a Stroman, like, leave that to McCann. They need to build that rapport. A guy like Alvarez, have him catch, the Jared Eichhoffs, the Jordan Yamamotos, the Sean Reed Foleys, the guys that are going to be, AAA guys. So that way he get a vibe of catching more advanced pitchers. So hopefully they get him some reps behind the plate this spring. But can't be more excited about Alvarez. I think he's got all-star potential written all over him.
Yeah, he definitely comes off to me as a long-term help, one of the faces of the franchise, and how fitting that you have 1-on-2, a duo that we could see very much long-term with the Mets and both Allen and Alvarez respectively. Very exciting stuff. And, when you look at the Mets and their catching history, we have the man, the myth, the legend, and Piazza over the past couple of decades, but then you also have, Paulo Duca. Outside of that, there hasn't been anything too drastic. Darno, we all know the story there. Things really just didn't fit after his injuries. And, if it was a different regime, he'd probably still be with the team right now. But James McCann's great, but you need a guy that you can probably have long term, because you don't have James McCann's and JT Realmuto types becoming free agents every offseason. You need a guy that you can have sustainable success with, and you never want a revolving door with your catcher and a pitching staff as stellar as what the Mets currently have and will probably have for years down the road. They've always been strong with their pitching. So you need to make sure you build those relationships. And Alvarez, in my mind, working himself up, already having a familiarity with the guys currently on the roster and will be going forward, is only going to build them well long term. So I don't see him going anywhere. And in my mind, I would definitely have him as arguably the top prospect for the Mets for sure.
Yeah, no, Alvarez, and to your point, free agents don't come at catcher because and that's the position scarcity thing. If you have the chance to ever acquire a guy that you think forget a star, forget like being JT Realmuto or, the best catcher in baseball. If you tell me you're getting a guy that you could count on to be an everyday catcher for 7 years, like, you're in the plus, because there's not many teams that have that. So I look forward to seeing Alvarez's development, and I think I think his defense will only get better. So yeah, no, for sure. He's a dude to watch. To me, he's the number one guy in the system. Matt Allen is hot on his heels, but those to me, like I said, are that's the separator. I think if you want to kind of tier out the top 10 in a sense, it's like Alvarez and Allen are this tier. The next tier is Mauricio, Crow Armstrong, Beatty, and Ginn, and then Vientos and the rest down the road are their own tier there. So that's kind of how I look at the system, and that's how I try to do it. I look at upside, and then I try to tier guys together. So it's like group them together, similar how I look at their upside. So like Alvarez would be my bet to be a future All-Star. Matt Allen also has legit All-Star potential. So they're their own tier, because the next level down, I don't know if they're all-stars per se, but still, potential quality major leaguers.
Yeah, tier making is a very smart way to go about ranking things, not just prospects, but just players overall. I toy with it myself, not as a writer, but just breaking down my own personal stances, especially with prospects. And that's a very smart way of going about things. But Joe, this was fantastic. I did not expect to go this long, so this was more of a podcast episode. So to everyone that chimed in and made it all the way to the end, pat yourself on the back. Really do appreciate it. But seriously, before I let you go, just thank you kindly again. This was a great discussion, and I'm very much looking forward to the further content that you're going to be having out for SNY, for your podcast, and all those great things. So make sure to plug your stuff one more time for the people in the back that already forgot possibly, and then I'll get you out of here.
Yeah, appreciate it. No, this was really fun. And now you know why I have a podcast, because I can't read all this stuff. So
I know. Yeah, you got to let it out. It's for sure.
But yeah, no, please, appreciate everything again. And, follow me on Twitter at PSL2Flushing, and that's TO, not the number 2. Subscribe to the podcast. It's on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, all that good stuff. That's So Mets podcast. And, if you do it, please leave us 5-star reviews and, leave reviews, all that stuff helps for the whole algorithm and, getting up the charts and, helping the podcast grow and get it to more people. Because ultimately there's a lot of Mets fans out there. Some of them don't have Twitter and don't have accessibility to see it. So, please feel free to check that out. And then, of course, my work over at SNY.TV. Go ahead and read everything I put up there. And, there's a bunch of other good writers there too. So check out their stuff. And yeah, no, I truly appreciate the opportunity to come on. It's fun to chat, and we'll have to do it again soon.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you again, Joe. I really appreciate it. And let's go Mets.
Let's go Mets.